I've got a very distinguished panel, and I want to make this a dialogue. Obviously, for many years, we've spoken about what we can do to improve trade. So maybe the context for our conversations today is about how do we, a lot of things have changed in our markets. Unemployment is a bigger challenge for our youth. We continue to invest a lot on infrastructure, which is power, roads, connectivity in our markets. Industrial groups are coming up in our market in the last couple of 20 years. And I wanted to ask an industrialist, Paul Makanza first. If you look at the journey for the last few years, 20 years actually, we've made some steps. But as industries in the region in Tanzania, we continue to have massive challenges for moving goods upwards across the regions. Maybe your reflections on what has worked and what can we do more to accelerate that in the next couple of 5 years to 2030? Paul, over to you.
Yes, we have made some progress. I mean, some of you will know that EAC has an industrial strategy, a long-term industrial strategy with very specific KPIs. But in terms of industries, we have made progress, but I have to be cautious here. Again, I mean, it's not what we had wanted, and the reason for that are many. Yeah, if I were to sum that up in one word, it would be the whole sort of business and investment climate. So if we begin and look at things like land, for example. You take the case of Kenya, land ownership is an issue, a number of disputes, and this again sort of delays a number of investment projects, okay? If you look at raw materials, we have comparative advantages in a couple of areas. One, agro-processing, two, minerals processing, petrochemicals and gas. But again, we do not have the extractive capacities to actually extract, for example, our oil and gas and iron ore efficiently. Funding, as the economist talked about, is an issue. Again, you talk about infrastructure, only 37% of our roads, for example, are paved in the region. And that adds to a lot of, logistics costs. You look at power. Yes, we have invested in power. But again, power in East Africa is the most expensive in the world, ranging from between 10 cents to 20 cents per kilowatt hour. Very expensive, makes us uncompetitive. And then you look at the whole issue of NTBs. So although we've made progress in terms of industries, but I think the industrial base, with perhaps the exception of Kenya, remains nascent, and there's still a lot of potential to move forward. Yeah.
Paul, I just want to come back to you as a chairman of the Confederation of the Industries Tanzania. Job creation, unemployment, solutions can come from private sector. And here we have got state actors, policy makers. My view is that it has been very slow to achieve the outcomes. I mean, what could you say to policy makers to be able to catalyze what industry is doing to address unemployment, which comes from manufacturing, opportunities for growth, and GDP expansion in the market?
Definitely, as I said, I mean, a critical area we can focus on is actually addressing the whole issue of NTBs, non-tariff barriers. I mean, some studies have shown that if you address those barriers, you can actually, increase trade, intra-EAC trade by 30-40%. And obviously that, stimulates more industrial activities, economic growth, and obviously that requires, it creates employment, investment in supportive infrastructure, and you actually generate incomes and reduce unemployment. So critically important. We need to address the whole issue. The factors that really impede economic growth, as I mentioned, starting from your power, digital connectivity, your NTBs, and so forth. Yeah.
Thank you. Monica, I want to come back to you, and I give you a story. So I was in Rwanda a few years ago, and they tried to send a truck from Kigali to the port of Mombasa. That truck took more than 14 days. I mean, and it's carrying some coffee. If you're taking it into the markets. And I just wanted to say you have a lot of experience in trying to uncover the non-trade barriers. From your own experience in Eastern Africa, what more can be done? This never moves away for more than a decade. What can be done, from trademark and from policymakers? Over to you.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me. As business people, what I would advise, because you asked what more needs to be done, is making use of the pre-qualification processes. For example, we have what we call the authorized economic operators, where you get pre-assessed, you get identified as the most trusted, not most trusted, but you are the trusted trader who's bringing in consignments. So it takes you shorter time to process your clearance at borders, at ports, at airports, all the ports that you'll be bringing in your consignment through. So that is one aspect that I think is not known and not being appreciated in a way that is not being made use of as much. What we're doing now, and I'll just mention what a bigger project that we're doing at Trademark Africa now around trade logistics information platform. So TLIP, in fact, looks at two main aspects: information sharing, but also connectivity. Because connectivity is key. And the two presentations that we've had today, even PS talked about the importance of having our regions, the countries in the regions, connected. That is when trade will happen. The other part is information, data. How do you transform that? Do we have systems, do we have agencies in these countries that can trust the transfer of that information, that data that is being collected and being used to clear and process as trade has to happen? Because for a business person, if you're able to reduce on time and cost, it takes you to do business, you will invest because you will know how long it will take you to actually make profit in that specific space.
Thank you, Monica. I want to ask Ambassador John, we've spoken about this for a long time.
Sure.
Maybe just weigh in on this particular question before I ask you your specific question on the NTBs.
First, maybe before responding, I should really commend Stanbic for this thought leadership. This is like World Bank quality type of analysis. So really, I want to commend the bank. Yes. First, we should appreciate of the fact that NTBs hinder trade. And once they hinder trade, they hinder development. And it is true. There are 2 or 3 types of what I might call types of NTBs. We talk about policy-related NTBs. It could be customs, it could be... And sometimes we talk of them as if it's always, and I know Paul won't like this, government's fault. It's actually private sector that pushes governments to institute NTBs to protect them. So what type of conversations should private sector governments have? Because once you eliminate NTBs, there are gains that we are all going to get as a region. For example, they are saying if we eliminate NTBs in East Africa, we are going to gain, the GDP gain is going to be around $25 billion in total for the region by the year 2030. But the question we need to talk will be the distributive effect of that $25 billion. And this is what people worry. They might say maybe countries that are more developed. But if you ask me, and I'm going to combine this with the question that you asked Paul, the advantage of reducing NTBs in Tanzania in East Africa has positively impacted countries that were less industrialized. 30 years ago, I'll give an example of Tanzania. A reduction of NTBs has helped Tanzania change the structure of its economy. 30 years ago, 48% of our economy was dependent on agriculture. Now it's only less than 25%. It's because there's a huge contribution of manufacturing sector. If you look at the export trade for Tanzania, number 1 is mining, number 2 is tourism, number 3 is transport services, number 4, which was not there, is manufacturing. manufacturing sector. And this is not agro-processing, this is what we call other manufactured goods, cement, plastics, etc. So yes, there's a need to look at how can we reduce NTBs that are policy-related, but also NTBs that are infrastructure-related. Because one of the challenges we have in the region, in the continent, is infrastructure connectivity challenges that you might, when you count the 28 days, it could be because sometimes it's rainy days, the roads are impassable. So what can we do, cooperation between private sector and government, to invest in transport infrastructure, to utilize technology? For me and Trademark, I was in Trademark and we talk very proudly of OSBPs. But for me, we should move from one-stop border post to non-stop border posts. Why is there a reason, with all the technology interventions and technology advancements that we have, if a truck starts to move from Dar es Salaam and going to Kigali, we have technology available for that truck not to stop anywhere because we can track. So I think there's a lot we can do, and this type of conversations can help converge our thinking and our ideas.
So Ambassador Joe, let me come back to you. So Patrick shared the numbers on the trade for the last couple of 2022.
Absolutely.
And I know that the PS mentioned a bit about the challenges we face in the region. But I wanted to hear where you sit, the lens on international trade. So what, from a numbers perspective, what role does trade have to address the two biggest problems? One is unemployment for young people today, and addressing the poverty challenges in line with our SDGs.
Without trade, you cannot achieve those. If we have globalization has helped us realize the fact that without international trade, there's no economy that can develop by trading with itself. All the economies, large and big, are looking for opportunities to trade with other countries. So yes, international trade helps to. First, if you remove NTBs, you're going to boost international trade. You're going to boost intra-Africa trade. You're going to boost global trade. And once you boost trade, you are raising opportunities for further industrialization. Once you raise opportunities for further industrialization and specialization, you're opening up opportunities for employment creation. You're opening up opportunity for back-end linkages and also forward linkages. So there's direct, like statistics. I think the World Bank report 2020 was saying, if you utilize AFCFTA properly and remove intra-Africa trade non-tariff barriers, by the year 2030, in East Africa alone, you can open up new employment opportunities to the range of 1.5 to 3 million new people employed in the region. And once you do that, and in Uganda, let me give an example. In Uganda, the opening up of trade in dairy sector has increased income of a Uganda farmer by over 20%, which then directly impacts on poverty reduction. So yes, there's direct correlation between removing NTBs, increasing trade. Increasing trade will result into employment creation, wealth creation, and then it will also have an impact on poverty reduction.
So I want to bring in the chairman here yet again. So, Ambassador has spoken about the opportunities, but as private sector, as industry, which is the conversation we have today. So my question to you largely is, so all these issues we're addressing, so how does this improve our competitiveness as industry? Because this is the biggest issue. These market corridors are opening. And do you think that gives an opportunity to bring in new FDI within Tanzania and the East African region?
Definitely. So just to respond to your question, as manufacturers, competitiveness is extremely key, okay? And a key element we focus on is a reduction in transaction costs. And therefore, just to give you an example, the Kenya SGR has reduced logistics costs by 40%, if I remember my numbers correctly. In terms of travel time, it has reduced travel time from 2 days to 8 hours. So efficiency, okay? So competitiveness, efficiency, and then that opens up, a lot more opportunities for investment, okay? Investment in terms of factories, investment in terms of human capital, investment in all, the sort of factors of production. So it is critically important that all these things work in consonant. You cannot resolve one, sort of problem and leave another challenge. It's got to be looked at holistically. Okay, and therefore, I mean. The opportunities
Correct.
are there. The shortcomings maybe in terms of funding, okay? Funding for, from a private sector perspective, I mean, we can always source funding for our factories and investments in different areas. It is the supporting infrastructure that may be a bit of a challenge, because then a lot of these mega projects, so if you're talking power, usually traditionally it's been governments, but then there are also opportunities for PPPs, okay? And the banks, obviously, we heard it's not a shortage of funding.
Correct.
The money is there, but, it's just how do we de-risk, the lending and so on.
So I want to come back to you, Paul, because you also wear another hat as East African Business Council.
Right.
And you looked at these things for many markets. And I want to go back to Kiprono's question, because there's a lot of friction. Manufacturing in Tanzania is getting progress. Number 4th in the economy today. In Kenya is different. It's dropped down to 7%. In Uganda is different. Maybe your reflections from the region. Are we removing the friction for manufacturers generally? Because this is really how you address your single largest challenges for SDGs, especially for unemployment, poverty reductions, reducing inequalities. So what could you say from an East Africa perspective, looking at the cluster in the role that you have as the director of EABC?
So from an East Africa perspective, I like the point which was made by the economists, the whole issue of nationalism. Yeah. So if you look at East Africa, the old East Africa, 67 to 77, there was a much closer level of integration. And therefore, and there was a real commitment. But I guess this trend they talked about of, moving back to sort of nationalism should worry all of us. I think we are stronger as a region rather than individual 8-member states. Now, the biggest stumbling block, as I said before, is the whole issue of NTBs. John talked about NTBs in terms of policy, but I like to look at them in terms of administrative, so your customs, processes, your extra tax charges, and but a lot of the tension actually comes from domestic taxes. Okay, basically, if you ask our members within EABC, what are the biggest sort of NTBs? They will tell you the rules of origin. They will tell you the other one will be road user charges. They will also tell you, they'll talk about discriminatory taxes. Okay, and this discrimination happens because we've not yet harmonized domestic taxes, and I guess that is the next stage.
Can I?
Yes, I'll come back to you. Just go ahead, Ambassador John.
No, this is an interesting point. If you look at if you look at us as a region, and you are to project 30 years,
correct,
we run a risk of our growth being stunted because of inability to create very robust regional value chains. And this could also be a result of the NTBs that we have. Because, of course, once we reduce the NTBs, or we remove the NTBs, we are creating an ecosystem that will allow every country to identify its competitive advantage.
Correct.
And create regional value chains. Now, the policy discussions that we need to have, and especially if you're taking a long-term perspective, is what are the short-term losses that some countries might face, and how do we cushion them against these losses for longer term benefits. So I think this conversation around NTBs really need to be had to ensure that for our economy as a region to attain the level of robustness that it deserves, we really need to say what type of regional value chains will emerge if we are to remove NTBs and allow the region to be competitive.
I want to come back to you, Monica. So, we're known as the region which has moved faster than the rest, SADC, COMESA. And I think we are known. Patrick spoke about the long history we have as EAC. But I think that's probably not the right lens. Our challenge is kind of to be a catalyst, to lead forward these economic blocks, probably closer to the European Union. And I want to come back to the question Ambassador John raised about the value chains across the regions, because that's really what you can do. If you have a steel manufacturer in Tanzania and the resources are in Uganda, how do you actually get it to work? And what needs to be done for that? We need to move away from supply chains, if you ask me, to be able to drive the value chains with some compensations or some kind of value. I want to come back to you, Monica, because you see this from Eastern Central Africa region.
Thanks a lot. What I would say is we really need to be very deliberate. We've had in the conversation from the beginning in the morning, if you look at the economies of Eastern, even Central, now Central is basically DRC, the sector that is leading is agriculture. So if we want to transform our economies, we want to transform the livelihood, there was a conversation around the impact on the SDGs as well, then if you want to reduce poverty, you want to create jobs, what do? It's just being deliberate in that specific sector where you can reach out to many. And now this brings in the value chain. The approach should actually then be on the entire market system, looking from the beginning of the value chain to the end. So if you pick a country, which comparative advantages does that specific country have? Which crops? How can then that country, how can it benchmark on that value chain to be able to feed the region and grow? So that would be the approach in terms of also reaching out to more who are involved in that specific value chain, empowering, bringing in the relevant support, technology, use of technology. We saw the maps of Africa and how we heavily rely on rainfall to date. But then again, that is what we do. Then how do we move out of it? How do we use technology? Because at times, technology can bring solutions, but can also bring problems.
Correct.
Yeah. Where we stand right now, with the whole aspect of we have to get digital, we have to have digital solutions. We have so many platforms, digital platforms, which are not speaking to one another. So even when John was talking about when a truck is moving from Rwanda and we know the destination, we should be able to actually follow through and track that truck. Sure. But then we don't have systems that are speaking to one another from the beginning to the end. So there are different aspects that have to be brought in and be thought about just to make sense out of it. Back to the question that you asked about how then do we move forward as a region? And this, we've taken pride as the EAC being the fast-moving, most integrated, and we are more or less setting the tone on how the continent should integrate. That is the pride that we've taken, well-deserved. But then again, how well are we learning from how we've done things to date? How harmonized? He has talked about harmonization. How harmonized? How are we implementing and streamlining the instruments that we have to facilitate trade, to attract investment? How predictable are our economies? Some of the geopolitical challenges that have just happened across the world, we've seen how we have shaken, not just as the region, the East, the Eastern Central, but then the entire continent. And some economies are still recovering. But then how do we build resilience in terms of what we've learned? And that is what, in my opinion, should then be taken forward to other regions. Pierce, in his speech, he talked about the tripartite. So this tripartite arrangement, which involves SADC, EAC, and COMESA, they cover most of the African countries, and almost 70% of trade, the continental trade, happens in these three regions. So it means if we are able to unlock all the bottlenecks, the barriers, the trade barriers, if we're able to place the tripartite as a learning block, then this is going to actually be one of the biggest solutions. So right now we can use platforms like this, and good enough, the EAC will be chairing for this tripartite. Then we could actually, roll over some of these lessons, gather what works best, see how that implies in this region, and then we can take it forward to others as well.
Let's put our hands together for our host for this session, Joshua Wigara, and our panelists, Monica Hangi, Ambassador John Ulanga, and Paul Makanza. Asanteni sana. Thank you very much for a very insightful panel.